Welcome to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems Fall Speaker Series. My name is Hannah Bartram, and I am the AIFS Education and Public Engagement Coordinator. And today we are delighted to welcome all of our fall speakers back for a moderated panel discussion that will conclude our fall speaker series. I'll introduce our speakers in a moment, but first let me give a quick introduction to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, also known as AIFS or AIFS. The Institute was established last year under an NSF USDA NIFA grant with the mission of developing and leveraging transformative AI for the ethical production and distribution of safe, sustainable, nutritious food with fewer resources. AIFS is a multidisciplinary collaboration between researchers at 6 different institutions conducting research with a holistic, integrated view of the food system, solving challenges in molecular breeding, agricultural production, food processing and distribution, and nutrition, and also focusing on the people behind the food system, using AI and technology as an enabler. If you would like more information on the research and engagement activities of AIFS, please visit our website and connect with us on social media. And all of the recordings from our speaker series are posted on our YouTube channel, which you can find a link to from our website. As I mentioned, today we are delighted to welcome back our 3 fall speakers, and I'll introduce them before we get into the discussion. Dr. Kimmo Makinen heads up innovation at Novozymes One Health, a biotech company in Denmark specializing in the development of microorganisms and enzymes. He joined Novozymes in 2018 and leads the development of probiotics for multiple health benefit applications. Novozymes is a new entrant in the human health space and as such has an opportunity to develop functional ingredients in a different and better way, including using AI as a tool. Dr. Gail Taylor is a distinguished professor and the chair of the Department of Plant Sciences at UC Davis. The department is home to 71 professors, and key research thrusts in plant sciences include plant breeding, genetics and genomics, crop produce quality and safety, and environmental informatics. She holds the John B. Orr Chair in Environmental Plant Sciences, and her research interests include sustainable food production systems, including breeding for enhanced quality in leafy greens. And Dr. Abigail Stevenson is Vice President of the Mars Advanced Research Institute, MARI. In this role, Dr. Stevenson leads the MARI team responsible for connecting Mars with emerging areas of science and technology in the fields of sustainability, health and wellness, and computational science. Prior to joining MARI, Dr. Stevenson was the director of the Mars Global Food Safety Center, where she led a global team addressing the most significant food safety challenges facing the global food supply chains. Under Dr. Stevenson's leadership, the Mars Global Food Safety Center focused on 3 critical areas of food safety: microbial risk management, mycotoxin risk management, and food integrity. And today's panel will be moderated by Dr. Harold Schmitz. Harold is co-founder and general partner of March Capital US LLC and a senior scholar in the Graduate School of Management at the University of California, Davis. Previously, he served 2 terms as the Art and Carlis Sioka Visiting Professor of Entrepreneurship and Innovation in the Graduate School of Management at the University of California, Davis. He worked in Mars Incorporated for 25 years, where he developed and executed the company's global strategy for advanced research and innovation at the intersection of food, agriculture, health, and sustainability via collaborations across sectors, including universities, government research institutions, and venture capital. He is an advisor to the Novo Nordisk Foundation's Bioinnovation Institute in Denmark, to the Artificial Intelligence Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, AIFS, located at UC Davis, and to Djiboutin's Innovation Ecosystem Group known as MISTA. He was recognized as outstanding alumnus of the Dale Bunkers College of Agriculture, Food, and Life Sciences at the University of Arkansas and was elected a life member in the Council on Foreign Relations. He was USDA National Needs Research Fellow during the 1990-1993 at North Carolina State University, where he trained in the intersection of food, agriculture, and health, and received his PhD in food science. He received his MS in food science from the University of Illinois. I will stop sharing so you can see the panel. This panel today is meant to be interactive, so we strongly encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A section throughout today's event. And Harold, I will turn it over to you to start the discussion.
All right, thank you, Hannah, and thanks for the kind introduction. And it's great to be here with this group. Obviously, there's been 3 presentations that have been outstanding and sort of set the scene for an industry perspective as well as an academic perspective regarding use of AI and throughout the food system. And I think also a nice array of different fields that demonstrates the value chain in the food system. So from the ingredient side, which Novozymes generally represents, the finished product side, which Mars generally represents, and then Gail's excellent talk about the fundamental research side from the university side of it. So that let's call it the fuzzy front end of the discovery side. So with that, I'd like to kick off with a few questions, and if people want to ask questions, that would be great. I think there's a Q&A box that people can put questions into, or the chat room. So we'll be monitoring both of those. So the first question that I'd like to kick off with, and I'd really appreciate it if each panel member could answer, and I'm going to start with Kimmo because he's the one who actually framed this question during his presentation. So Kimmo mentioned the concept of putting AI at the center of a business enterprise going forward. And I think just to sort of modify the question, and I'd like to hear from each panelist in terms of their response, starting with Kimmo, and then maybe we could go to Gail and then Abby in that sequence. But it'd be great if each of you could spend a few moments or minutes describing as an example what it might look like if actually each of you put AI at the center of the programs, whether it's the businesses that you're a participant in, or Gail, in your case, the university program that you lead. What would it look like if AI was at the center of these programs versus maybe where it is now? And if you could start with your answer as to where you actually think it is now, and then what the paradigm shift would look like by putting it at the center. So Kimmo, I'll turn it over to you to start with this.
Yeah, I can certainly share some thoughts. So I guess on a higher level, what we're really talking about is becoming a data-driven organization that uses AI and data science to drive all decision making, and taking as much of this sort of a human randomness and biases out of the picture. So and for us, what that means is that at every part of the value chain, from the concept or the idea to the actual product, there are many deliverables that AI can bring. We need to discover new targets. If you have to figure out how to address a specific health condition that may not be known. In some cases, it may be known, but we may have to discover that. And AI can help us fast identify those targets and then validate the targets, just like you have to do in pharma. But we can do that also with functional foods and ingredients. Then for clinical studies, we do a lot of clinical studies, and failure rates, unfortunately, are still pretty high. But by using AI, we can be far better at identifying populations that we recruit into the studies and make sure they actually respond to our ingredients, rather randomly recruiting a group of people that look the same but actually are not the same underneath when it comes to physiology. So that's where AI also helps us. And then finally, when we have the product, it is possible to offer to companies precision solutions, precision nutrition, rather than this kind of one-size-fits-all solutions, because we know who the product is intended for, not in terms of some kind of a random demographic, but rather the physiology that will respond to that product, right? So there are so many different and consumer insights as well. Consumer insights, everything has to interact. And if you have AI at the center, right, you can aggregate data, you can derive insights from the scientific and commercial and consumer perspective, and then bring them all together in a way that single human being simply cannot, because there's too many connected dots. So, and then you can arrive at these sort of quantified insights as to what is the real opportunity to innovate. That's one way to think about AI at the center of an organization. And today we're definitely not there. We have some individual elements which individually have to be strengthened and then connected as a whole.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Kimmo. Gail?
Great answer. I guess I was thinking in the context of plant breeding, and I think that one of the challenges I identified in my talk was that breeding food crops for better fit for purpose for the future, that's a long-term, very slow business. It's just painfully slow, every aspect. And I think I showed that it can take a decade or more from having an original idea and thinking about a trait of interest until something gets to be commercialized. So AI has tremendous power to accelerate that pipeline. What are we doing at the moment? Well, we're beginning to use AI to be more data-driven and predictive in plant breeding pipelines, but we're only just beginning to use all of those tools to actually be center and front of breeding approaches. And it doesn't matter what breeding approach we might be talking about, whether it's modifying a single gene and editing a plant and developing a commercial edited food plant for the future. That is still tremendously time consuming, just designing the edits, going through, large gene families, looking at databases. AI can have a role there. Or whether it's using genomic selection, so multiple DNA markers to accelerate our pipeline. We have the potential to be much more predictive there. So plant breeding is about bringing the genotype of the plant together, i.e. all of the DNA and information that forms a plant, and the phenotype. So what characteristics we want to enhance and the ones we want to remove. And in both of those domains, AI is beginning to have some influence, but it's not center stage. So in genotyping, for example, we are using algorithms to predict sets of DNA markers which are most informative for breeding, but we're not doing that routinely, and there's tremendous potential there to do much more. And also, this came up in Abby's talk, actually, that databases of DNA and the genome data are actually they're not all available publicly, and the ones that are not the best that they can be. So we could be doing more there. And then on phenotypes, the plant characteristics that we're interested in looking at, or we need to look at hundreds of phenotypes in thousands and tens of thousands of plants. And we have been limited by human endeavor. For example, if you look at a trace of secondary chemicals from one individual plant, there are multiple aspects to the chemical signature, some of which we understand, some of which we don't understand. And we need to be able to understand those in thousands of breeding lines to be able to select and take forward our breeding material. So chemical signatures, for example, then phenotyping a field, running your device, your UAV or whatever over, looking at hyperspectral images, looking at essentially spectral data, which is related to the chemistry of the plant or the performance of the plant. We're beginning to unravel that, but we're really doing it in a very small way at the moment. And AI has tremendous potential to be at the center of that focus. So I think those are some of the ways that AI could really impact, but it's all about time and accelerating the breeding pipeline.
Thanks for that, Gail. So I am going to put you on the spot, but it's a really, really speculative question. So you can literally answer anything and it'll be credible. But, but using, so because plant breeding does take decades, and it is sort of even longer than clinical trials. Because of that, and just knowing what you know about the potential of AI, maybe to influence the things that you just said. I mean, if we were sitting here 20 years, 15 to 20 years from now, and actually AI had come online and it was at the center of your program, how much acceleration do you think you could get out of having AI at the center of your plant breeding program, just as a notional sort of guess?
At least 5 years, I think. One of the mid-ranging steps could be accelerated significantly. Clearly, if we went to sort of mass gene editing, if we could stack edits and do multiple things, the sky's the limit there, because then we can get things out very, very quickly in those pipelines. But that also has to be acceptable to the public. But so 5 years at least for more molecular informed breeding. There really is no limit, but I would say also 5 years, because getting through the regulatory hurdles takes time too. So at least half a decade and potentially even more.
Awesome. Thank you. That's pretty exciting. So Abby, over to you.
Yeah, I was thinking, obviously I had a little bit of time to think about this because Kimmo went first and then Gail went second, and both fantastic answers that I can build on. And I think if I think about a business like Mars, I think the way we're starting to embrace AI really is driving a massive change process, a true transformation in the way that we do business. AI will be the center of our business, at the center of businesses in the future. And it's a journey, it's a change process that we're starting to embrace, and that industries, I'm sure, are starting to embrace everywhere, to move AI to the center of the decision making that we, and that goes way beyond science technology. Technology into manufacturing, and how we automate some of the decisions that people are making every day about in our factories, in our food safety, in our science discovery, in our innovation pipelines. And I think we're on a journey there. And I think where we are in that change process is that there is a realization, a growing realization across businesses and industry, that this is coming, and it has the ability to transform everything we do on a daily, weekly, monthly, and longer term basis. But it's not there yet. And there are things that are moving in place that will enable it to become core for industry. I'm just thinking that I think as industries are recognizing the need to embrace and change, but not quite sure exactly what that looks like yet. So that recognition, that first step in the change process, I think it's happening. And I'm certain work done in places like AIFS and other, and many of the other areas that we're seeing, the startup communities, some of the groups underway are helping drive this change and realization. And once it gets to recognition, we have some big challenges ahead, like how do we equip our organization with the right talent, the right people with the right skills in the right places to fully embrace and understand the capabilities we have. And I think that is a challenge that we're facing into now across the industry. That will become potentially a blocker to being able to adopt widely some of these technologies going forward, because I think we're probably facing a bit of a talent gap in some of these areas. And how do we sustain that? How do we change behaviors in our longer term associates as well, through upskilling, through building capability into those traditional areas of science, technology, manufacturing that we've got a lot of skills and experience in across the different industries. But this will require massive upskilling of capability, as well as bringing through new talent in areas as well. So I see that as probably as big a challenge as anything. How do we upskill, and how do we obtain the talent needed to drive the change that is already underway?
Very good. I appreciate that. You've actually sort of anticipated a question that came in on the chat board from Danielle LeMay. So actually, Abby, you can probably get out of answering this question since you sort of addressed it. That was very, very anticipatory on your part, very predictive on your part. But Gail and Kimmo, we can start with Gail in answering the question that came from Danielle, which is, in each of your respective areas, what do you see as the barriers to the adoption of AI? So sort of, building on where Abby was going, specifically for your areas, where do you see the barriers for adoption of AI and putting it at the center of what you're doing? You're on mute,
Gail,
Gail.
I think, yeah.
Thank you. I guess from my perspective, sometimes in academia, it's quite hard to break out of disciplines. So disciplines are wonderful. We have to have our discipline-based knowledge. It's fantastic. But AI, in order to move forward, it's, from my perspective, it's this combination of computational mathematics and biology that we have to bring together. And AIFS is doing some of this. So providing the opportunity for scholars, graduates, undergraduates, to be strong in both of those disciplines is really important for the future. And it also, because obviously if you're trained in a discipline, let's say plant breeding or plant sciences, the headspace, the sort of ethos, the philosophy that comes along with that may not be suited to coding and doing some of the mathematics and doing some of the other things. So providing those environments really important, providing the enabling the workforce in future to have that multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary mindset that will take us forwards. And I think we're well aware of that, and on the way to doing that, we just have to always keep it very much in mind.
Got it. Kimmo, your thoughts?
Yeah, so just in our organization and probably in others as well, where I would say AI is not a routine, data science is not something that is done everywhere. I would say culture, data culture is something that has to be established, and then people will do things in a new way. But I think that's not just done with the snap of the fingers. It takes time, and it stands in the way if it's not done. People have their habits. People like to Google stuff. They don't necessarily always, reach for the extremely powerful AI tool simply because it's not something they usually use, right? And some of them may also require some learning to be able to get the most out of them, and they can look a bit intimidating. So I would say it's the culture and habits is number one, and then I would say on a sort of organizational investment level, if you want to bring in AI in a serious way, it's going to cost money and resources, headcounts, and all that kind of thing. Yet the returns may not be that immediate. If you start de-risking your pipeline today, you're going to get returns some years down the line, and the management may be looking at hey, what's going to happen in the next 2 years, right? How do I drive my top line? How do I bring in profits in the next 2 years? And then if a guy like me and says, hey, let's create this amazing data engine, and by the way, it's going to pay off in the next 5 to 7 years, it may not be the winning proposition. So there's that kind of a barrier as well that I'd like to highlight.
Yeah, that's great on the culture part. So Alan Van Dyne has just written a very challenging question, actually. And so I'll read this out, and you guys, whoever wants to jump in, please jump in on this. But Alan writes, what are the risks of making AI the center of the technology of the S&T organization, and how do we mitigate these? So what are the risks of making AI the center of your organization? Anybody want to take that one?
I can have a go, and then anyone could build. I mean, I think one of the potential risks I see is that if we have is thinking that AI is going to replace science and good judgment around and knowledge and expertise and experience. I think they are complementary, and we should never forget that, at least for the next, for the future as I see it. It won't replace science and experience, the experience and judgment of a scientist. It's complementary, and I think the power is in bringing those two together. So enabling the scientist to really focus in on, to be able to cut through all the noise. And AI enables focus, and it enables the scientists to really focus in on the important things and see clarity through the noise.
I had a similar sort of answer. It goes back to that disciplinary, interdisciplinary. We can have data and be data driven, but in plant breeding, for example, but we still need to understand how plants work and to interrogate data and answers and outputs in the same way. And we must never lose sight of that. So that's a risk, I think.
Yeah, I can only echo that, certainly. If people expect that AI will create these magic innovation machines that practically make decisions for us, then people like us are no longer needed. You just have your AI machine and we can all go home, I think. But that's not going to happen anytime soon, I don't think. Then another thing is, of course, that we have to be very careful what we feed into the AI machines, and we curate the data, and we're very careful about the garbage in, garbage out phenomenon, right? So because once we become more and more reliant and we truly start trusting, AI, then we better be sure the data is of good quality.
Those are great answers. And, as Abby was, saying her answer, what came to mind was, think about how R&D has been outsourced, in various parts of it over the years. And actually, I think, Abby, as you were saying, that was what popped into my mind, is that, if AI really is adopted and it really is put at the center of organizations, then, and it does work, let's say, then, at the beginning, I can easily imagine executives or leaders in other organizations saying, "Great, let's outsource to the AI," and then, Kimmo, to your point, then actually the curation of data and that sort of thing, all of that perspective gets lost. So anyway, that's a great question, Alan. I'm glad you asked
and
that.
I would just like to add also that the I guess, of the expectation what AI can deliver today and what it will deliver in the future is so important. I was just in a discussion recently where we threw some AI at a particularly complex problem, right? And it turns out that the AI didn't completely solve the problem, and yet the management was so disappointed. It's like, really? Does this stuff even work, right? It's hello, it's a super difficult problem, and we got some insights. We didn't completely solve it. So there's also the expectation calibration that has to happen.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that, Kimmo. And just to build on that as well, I think, and Gail, you mentioned the regulatory environment. Of course, at the moment, the regulatory environment doesn't accept AI driven insights alone. They have to be verified. And I think it can help you cut through, but at the moment, it does not provide the answer. And certainly, and not enough of an answer to change regulation or influence regulation in that way.
But I think that's good. There always has to be sort of proof of concept. Yeah.
I absolutely agree.
So a question that actually came up, during Abby's presentation, and she brought it up herself, and I know this is on a lot of people's minds. So this is the the concept that actually to really bring, let's call it enterprise AI to life, there needs to be available data assets, or a sharing and pooling of these to really create the data lakes that are appropriate for solving certain problems and addressing challenges and opportunities. So I'd love to hear from each of you guys. What are the data assets that you wish you could access, and also, because there are the ones that you wish you could access, maybe some you can access, but there's certainly some that you cannot. And so I'd really love to hear your views on how AIFS as an organization might be able to pitch in and help if they knew this was an issue, if you thought that there were strategies that AIFS could deploy to help you access these, that would be great. But why don't we start with Abby? Can you start with this, since you actually brought it up during your presentation? I know you've thought about it a lot.
Yes, and I think sharing of food safety information, I think, is one area that I think it's tricky from a regulatory point of view. But if we could pool data and enable our, an understanding of vulnerabilities in the food supply chain, we would, I think, be able to move collectively towards safer, more resilient food supply chains. And the environment doesn't currently encourage that, really, because it encourages people to share vulnerabilities without providing a safe, anonymous place in which to share those. So the current food system isn't set up in a way that enables us to share early warnings, insights, things in a way that will enable us to move to that more preventative and potentially then prescriptive position with vulnerable raw materials and supply chains. So I think that is an area where there would be huge benefit in being able to provide safe space for sharing of that kind of information.
And do you think AIFS itself could help with that? I mean, do you have any specific thoughts on that, or?
Potentially, yes. And I said it in my talk, but I think the Queen's University model is quite an interesting one, where it's been a collaboration between the government and academia, really to help provide industry a safe space that benefits everybody. And I think that three-way model is an interesting one. But it's not, it then facilitates research because you have a pool of data that then can be leveraged through an independent academic organization in the right way, while creating that safe space for industry to be able to submit their data, which could then fuel future research, because there is that data pool that can be used for other appropriate applications. So potentially there are ways to create that standardized approach to collecting data that could fuel potential research. Yeah.
Very good. Kimmo, your thoughts?
Yeah, a few thoughts here. Of course, I'm from a different field again. You mentioned, Gail, a standardized way to collect data. Well, that would be fantastic, of course, because, in addition to the proprietary data sources that we are amassing and companies are building internally, public data is going to be critical going forward, of course, for health benefits. But the kind of problems we run into when we dig into public data is it's so heterogeneous, and just you have to go through a lot of quality controls. You have to weed out a lot of studies and data sets, and finally you find the few that you can actually then compile and meta-analyze, from scratch and get new insights. So if there is some kind of a way to standardize data collection for, I guess, for anything, but certainly for human health, from my perspective, that would be great. I don't know what AIFS could do there. But, in terms of what kind of a data set would I love to get my hands on, I guess, fundamentally anything that combines, scientific omics, biomarker data with rich phenotypic data, because, all the omics stuff on its own is of very limited value. Right, it has to go with the phenotype, and then you start making the correlations, and you start getting to some kind of an insight. So that's from I don't know, from the more fundamental perspective that a good data set looks like for somebody working in human health.
Excellent. Gail?
Well, bioscientists, particularly in academia, have shared data for a long time, and also companies to some extent. I'm thinking about gene databases, expression databases, DNA databases. But we've heard about some of the issues with these data sources, that the quality can be very mixed and they can be difficult to interrogate. And so I guess there is an issue around quality, that we'd like to see better quality. And the idea of a data lake, it's fantastic, but from my perspective, it's really about different data types talking to each other that would be phenomenally useful. And although there is some of that in general, we tend to have to go to lots of different places to get different types of data, and that can be rather painful. And so thinking about food, human health and nutrition, if we had an ambition, it would be to bring in a much better way those concepts together. So, you know, if you're interested in personalized health and whether that works, and so the human genome databases with these phenotypes, along with some of the plant databases and the traits we might be able to modify, to think much more ambitiously about sharing those types of data and enabling them to talk to each other. Because if anyone's ever really tried to do that, it's quite tricky. It's not easy. It's getting a little better, but yeah, it's hard.
So could you, and especially since you're sitting there in Davis, could you see how the AIFS group headquartered at Davis could actually help with what you just said?
Well, we talked about it, and we're writing something, but it really starts with sort of picking it apart and targeting maybe one or two things that we could go for. We can't do everything, but maybe we can do something, and it's how we might frame that. I don't think we should lose sight of it. I think it's really important. It potentially, yes, we could do something.
Mm-hmm. You know, I was just thinking as you guys were saying that, it's obviously, you know, programs like AIFS depend upon financial support, and you know, fortunately, AIFS has great financial support from USDA and NSF, and so I wonder if there's an opportunity for data to be a currency, and for maybe Steve and his colleagues can think about how to create industry partnership programs where instead of money transacting, there's some sort of data transaction. So I'll just sort of leave that out there. It's the new Bitcoin model.
Well, I think it's a point well made, because what universities do have is usually a lot of high performance computing and ability to handle quite a bit of data. So, you know, that's an asset we can propose.
Mm-hmm. Very good. So Amin Itanadi has submitted a question, which and Kimmo, since you sort of brought up your recent traumatic experience about management and high expectations and that sort of thing, I'll let you start with this. But how can one manage high expectations of AI, and how can you identify and communicate, you know, what's possible and currently what's impossible? I mean, so what are some, let's call it general management of the managers sort of principles that we should be thinking about from an expectations management perspective?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to explain is that AI in so many levels is just a kind of a buzzword, and you know, start breaking it down what it actually means today, so people don't think about Schwarzenegger and Terminator and that kind of stuff, which may come to mind. So, yeah, so I guess, you know, if you explain that today what we can do for discovery, we can take a bunch of omics data, you know, diverse data, useful data, and find the differentiation points between healthy and, you know, unhealthy individuals, and correlate that with a bunch of metadata, phenotypic data, and then find some scientific insights, link that up with the market insights, also then crunched and analyzed with the, you know, data AI-like approaches, and the same done for consumer insights, and explain that this is what we can do today, and this is how it will help your business. This is how it will drive top line. I guess then you will just, you know, sell it as a value proposition, right? You don't say I have the magic innovation machine. You say I have these tools today, and this is how it will make profit for our business. So that's my recommendation.
Very good. Abby, any learnings from your sphere on this?
Yes, I think there's a fine line between underplaying it and overplaying, and then disappointing in expectations. And we're through our experience so far, I think working on specific use cases while having a longer vision in mind, and a kind of 3 to 5 year plus kind of plan for where we want to be, working on much shorter, quicker wins through relevant use cases with business impact early is also working, so that the proof of the return on some low-hanging fruit actually comes through early to create that the quick wins and the buy-in early, while also having a much longer term, much bolder ambition based on what we know and believe is going to be possible in the long term. But getting those quick wins early and getting the buy-in and the return early is critical.
It's a great answer. I was just, you know, as you were saying that, I was thinking, you know, especially in the food sector, so including, you know, the food and ag and the whole value chain piece, just the way that returns, be it financial returns or whatever, it's a different model than, let's say, the pharmaceutical and drug discovery industry. And so, you know, the idea that a deep mind, for example, can create something that can influence drug discovery, the expectation actually going in is, hey, we're going to do this, and the payoff is not going to be for another 10 years or thereabouts. Whereas in our space, in the food space, there's different expectations that are much shorter term. And I like the way you put it about, you know, yes, you can have a great long-term goal, but it's really, really important to identify very clear nearer term milestones that represent those payoffs. So I thought that was really well said. Gail, do you want to add anything to this? Or
well, only that I think communication is key so that expectations don't get out of sync with what can be delivered, and communicating and re-communicating that message. And another way of putting that is the long term and the sort of medium term achievements, and to keep re-communicating so that those things don't get out of sync.
Awesome, thank you. And
100%. And you know, just one thing that we have experienced with I think we tried the approach of pitching an amazing project, an AI-driven project, you know, getting it approved, then disappearing for about 8 or 9 months and coming back with results that are not quite what was expected. So that's something that you definitely should not do, I think.
Right. So Steve Brown, by the way, I just want to note, sent a note saying that he actually has already been talking with a company about this data as a currency piece for AIFS. So that's great. So there you go. AIFS is in action already. So Paul Singh sends in a question, which is, currently there is minimal exposure to data sciences in most biological science curricula. Would you support changes in our academic programs for next generation graduates? And this is going to tie into the talent question I hope we'll get to. But Gail, naturally, I'm going to start with you on this. What do you think about that question?
It's a great question. And I would like to think in Davis, which is what I'm a bit more familiar with, we have a little bit more flexibility in the way courses can be taken. But we don't have, or not until recently, we haven't had these specific programs. We do have a new degree on ag tech, which is addressing some of this. And I think it is happening, and I'm seeing it happening with respect to sort of ag and plants and digital. So for example, in our own degree, one of our new tracks going forward from October is digital plants, which is about exactly what we've been discussing. And I know in other institutions across the US, these things are happening. So it's coming. maybe it hasn't been fast enough, and maybe this current generation have missed out a little bit on that. But you know, there are always opportunities to go to do masters, and I always think the really great qualified people are those who've done a sort of their undergrad in one discipline, then transferred discipline to a master's, and so you can build up that skill set. It's hard to get it all, but you know, there are ways of doing it. But I think if we look back in 10 years from now, those undergraduate programs that you're talking about, from my experience, will look very, very different in the biosciences. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess this gets to the sort of the convergent sort of thinking that some people have been talking about during the last few years about disciplines and how that's emerging. So I'm actually going to build on that question, and I want to go to Abby and then Kimmo with this, which is, you know, for you guys, as you're thinking about talent and bringing talent into your organizations, into Novozymes, into Mars in the future, to really help you drive these sorts of programs with AI in them, what experiences and training and skills would you hope that early career researchers and students that you might hire or bring in as interns or whatever it might look like, what sort of skills, experiences, and training would you want to see from the university environment that would best suit you guys' needs? Abby, could you think about that?
Yeah, and I guess what Gail described around the multidisciplinary approach, we're seeing that too in industry and in science done, you know, within an industry setting, that need to be ambidextrous, if you like, and able to both be a technical expert within the field in which you maybe started, with the ability to embrace new computational science techniques, data analytics, bioinformatics. It's coming everywhere. And what I also see, certainly here in the UK, I have less experience in the US, is that, you know, PhD proposals are all heading in that direction. You know, around 2/3 of the PhD kind of topics out there being called for applicants at the moment require both skills, both that technical interest with the ability to handle data modeling, and a whole new way of handling huge data sets, and the prediction and the ability to deal with those. So I see it coming, and that's the future talent we need in industry as well.
Great answer. Kimmo, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. If we can have the combo of somebody who understands life sciences and data science, that's amazing. It's tough to have discussions about our business problems with somebody who does not understand biology at all. It
Right.
really is very difficult if they don't understand the first concept. So the kind of talent we have today are actually, you know, people who used to be biologists or biochemists and then self-trained often, you know, as data scientists, and that works well. But of course, if there was an integrated university program, that would be great. What sort of exposure, if somebody has worked with the business problem before in a business setting as an intern, that's a huge advantage. So if you do maybe blue sky, that can be a bit of a shock if you are already then, you know, directly employed in a high pressure corporate setting. So if you've done that before as an intern, that will help. But I think otherwise, what sort of thing would be looking for? I think I would be looking to build a kind of a diverse team, you know, data science team, where you have a bit of everything. You'd have your machine learning specialist, your analytics specialist, front-end programmers, data engineers. So I couldn't say which one is more important. It depends probably what you don't have yet, and you need to find. That's what is most important in that moment. But if somebody has on top the ability to communicate what their data science is all about, and what is the vision, how does it bring value, because that doesn't always exist in the same person, I guess, who is very good at doing the programming. But if it does, that's a huge advantage as well.
Excellent. Thanks for that.
I could not agree more, Kimmo. That ability to to be able to translate the deep technical into something non-technical people can relate to is a skill. Yeah, I agree.
The advice I would give to graduates, I pick up on what Kimmo was saying, that always try to do an internship with a company to understand how research is utilized and what it means to a company, because that can be very different actually from being in academia. And I think that also helps graduates, particularly with their abilities to communicate, because they suddenly realize that they do need to have that skill set, and it's really important. But I just wanted to make one other comment. When my group first got into big data, when we had our first terabyte data sets from sort of sequencing soil and transcriptomics and things, my graduates then were all getting employed in the city, stock markets, banking, treasury. So they were going outside the science discipline. So it's wonderful now to see that that's not happening any longer, that they're actually being employed within more scientific sort of endeavor. But they were being hoovered up for a while just because they could handle big data.
Right.
So I think anyone who's listening who's in that situation, it's just a wonderful opportunity going forward, that bringing together biosciences and computational sciences and data-driven approaches, it's a fantastic time to be going into the workforce.
Yeah, the hyphenated skill set there. Yes. So I'm going to ask this question, and because this is going to bring us home here, we're almost to the top of the hour, and then you get to think about it for a minute, because I'm going to read a response from someone in the chat room, so you get sort of a second to think about it, because I want you to sort of give a punchy answer here, and that is, what advice would each of you give to AIFS regarding its strategy and focus during 2022, given given your specific business and research interests, and obviously given the general escalation of AI that's driving new research and innovation opportunities outside of the traditional food system. So what specific advice would you give to AIFS for their strategy and focus going forward in 2022? So while you think about that for just a few seconds, I'm going to read Scott May's response or thought that he put out, and Scott leads the MISTA group that Givaudan supports down in San Francisco. But I think this is a great comment. Building the capabilities outside of the castle, or the sort of the large institutions that each of the three of you represent, such as via startups, could be a good way to avoid the challenges that we've talked about in terms of adoption of AI. So, using startups and the ROI that they would generate might actually help with the cultural acceptance inside the castle. So the outside in strategy could be a great way to start. And we were going to actually talk a little bit about, what you guys thought about startups out there, but we're going to run out of time. So I appreciate, Scott, you sending that. I think that's a really, really cool provocation. So anyway, I will start with Kimmo. What's your advice to AIFS for 2022? Bring it home.
Well, indeed, if there is some kind of a startup convening platform where we could, almost like pick and choose and interact with the relevant startups, that would be amazing, which goes beyond the individual incubators. I think I hadn't thought about it, but now that Scott brings it up, it sounds amazing if that would be possible, right? Because otherwise I was just going to propose some kind of a sandbox setup where we can play around with data sets, which might be otherwise difficult to access or handle from a privacy perspective, all these electronic patient health records type of things, right? Which otherwise we might not be able to do anything with. If AIFS has a way to give access to such a thing and let us play around with that in a safe environment, that would also be helpful, right?
Great, thank you. Abby?
Yeah, I think there's so many different things that we could do in this space. I think it is about being clear on the problem that we're trying to solve through some of the questions we're asking, and then how we would envisage that the work being applied within the food industry at some point in the future, because to really drive the change that we're trying to make in this through AIFS, it has to be applied in the end. So working through research with the end in mind will enable the change that I think we all see and feel is going to be possible through this work.
Awesome, great answer. So Professor Gail, you're going to get the last word here.
It sort of picks up on both of those answers, actually. There's some fabulous work being initiated and ongoing within AIFS. And if you think of the institutions involved, Davis, Berkeley, Illinois, Cornell, the sheer weight of the expertise there is fantastic. So we're doing some great things. But I wonder if there's the potential to pick up on some of these ideas and identify in 2022 the big project where we all come to bear in a sort of sandpit type activity and identify implementation, the big project that binds us all together, that we're all putting all of our collective disciplinary interest into, so we can figure it out. And what that might be, I don't know. But wouldn't it be fantastic to have that target that we all work on together?
That's great. That all three of those and then binding together, like you said, that was excellent. So Hannah, over to you. I think this was a great panel.
Yeah, I second that. What a great way to wrap things up with a big idea. Thank you very much, Gail, Abby, Kimmo, for bringing your perspectives to this conversation. And a huge thank you to you, Harold, for facilitating this engaging dialogue today. This has been so great. And just a few words about our upcoming events. I'm going to share my screen real quick. We'll be hosting another speaker series this winter and spring with more thought leaders from across the food system. And we will announce those dates and speakers soon. And I'd also like to let you know about another exciting event this spring. Together with the German Cluster of Excellence, FINA-ROB, AIFS is organizing the second edition of the International Conference on Digital Technologies for Sustainable Crop Production, DigiCrop 2022. Targeting digital technologies like robotics, machine learning, AI, and others, with the aim of improving agriculture, especially crop production. And this conference is a 100% online conference, free of charge for participants and presenters, and has the goal of seeing the best works in this area that have been generated recently. The call for presentations is open now through January 5th. You can find out more information on the website. And to keep up with AIFS's activities, you can connect with us through the links on the bottom of the screen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.